Peoples of the worldwide federated internet. What's good? Thank you. Welcome to the Thinking Age. Thank you for joining me on this journey of thought. I saw a pretty interesting interaction a couple hours ago, and it got me to thinking about that interaction. The interaction was between Jerry Nadler and Congressman Chip Roy from Texas. The interaction was around the Second Amendment and the purpose of the Second Amendment. Many congressmen and many senators are lawyers. I think a good portion of them are. So they understand law. They understand, at a minimum, I believe they understand the Constitution. Maybe some of them don't. I don't want to assume because I've seen many things coming out of Washington. Maybe these people really don't know. Maybe it is a game of ignorance. And by game of ignorance, I mean maybe they want us to believe that they don't know. They want us to believe that they can't see certain things, but they actually do. Nadler asked Chip Roy a question. He tries to paint him, box him in a corner. The question was meant to paint a picture to pull on your heartstrings, pull on your emotions. I'm not a good debater. Not at all. I'm a conversationalist. I like to think long form about things. So if you say something, I might not be able to respond right away. I might need some time to sit back, think about it, chew on it for a little bit, take it around for a little bit, think about it from different angles, and then come back to you. So I'm not good on a fly. There's many people who are good on a fly. I wish I was better at that, but I'm not. Chip Roy answered this question masterfully, and I got to give it to him. I don't know that Nadler doesn't understand the purpose of the Second Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. I believe he does, but I could be mistaken. Maybe he does not. And if he doesn't, he shouldn't be where he's at. There's a concerted effort to diminish the intent of the Second Amendment. Now, I don't know what the reasoning for this is. I don't know if it's nefarious. I don't know if there's a group of people behind the scenes who specifically plot to attack the Second Amendment to remove power from the hands of the individual, the law-abiding citizen. Maybe that is the case, but I don't know that. I can't prove that beyond a shadow of a doubt. I can see circumstantially how many things line up and stack up to that end, but I can't prove that. So I don't necessarily lean into that, but I do have questions. These questions are based around the knowledge or lack thereof of many congressmen and senators. Maybe they know, maybe they don't know. Maybe there is some ulterior motive. Maybe there's some evil and wicked motive. Very possible. I don't put that past anyone. But I want to take this time to make what I believe is a very sound and historical argument for the reason for the Second Amendment. And that reason is to discourage despotism and tyranny. Now, I know that there are many who believe that the Second Amendment is for hunting. To me, that is a peripheral advantage. That's not the reason for it. Some believe it's specifically for individual self-defense. That is a peripheral advantage, but that is not the reason. The sole reason for the Second Amendment is to discourage despotism and tyranny. I'm going to make this argument from the intent of the founders. Well, how do we know the intent of the founders? If you read the Declaration of Independence, it's obvious. I'm going to read the second paragraph to the Declaration of Independence. And I'm also going to read an article from history.com just to understand a little bit more of the historical context of the Second Amendment. So I'm going to get to this. And before I do that, I'm going to play this interaction between Nadler and Congressman Chip Roy. And I want you to hear what Nadler says. If you're watching this podcast on YouTube or my Instagram page, I want you to look at Mr. Nadler's face as he asks the question. It's almost like he tries to come off as though, is this what you're saying? Like he doesn't know what's going on. But he's really pulling at emotional heartstrings. And Congressman Roy really does a good job of kind of stiff-arming that and just getting right to the point. So I want you to listen to this.
You said that you could use a semiotic weapon to fight tyranny.
Sure.
You mean you'd use it against American troops?
The very existence of the Second Amendment is designed purposefully to empower the people to be able to resist the force of tyranny used against them to step over their natural rights given to them by God.
Now, I've gone over some of these thoughts before. And like I said, I believe the case I make is a very sound historical case using the Declaration of Independence, which was penned by the founders, right? So you get their thoughts and their intent. You get a lot of that in the Declaration of Independence. If you read the Declaration of Independence and the preamble to the U.S. Constitution, you will really understand the context of the U.S. Constitution, and you will understand the intent behind the Bill of Rights. The language of the Constitution will make more sense when you do this. So we're going to move over to the Declaration of Independence. Like I said, we're going to read the second paragraph, and we're going to see what was said, because there's some specific wording and specific language used that you mustn't miss. Now, understand, this is not an argument for the people who are against owning weapons, owning firearms. I get it. I understand. I'm not making an argument of whether you should or shouldn't own firearms. I have my opinion on that. But my argument is, what is the intent of the Second Amendment? Why is it there? We're going to unpack that. All right. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. This is the reason governments are instituted. They laid out the reasoning governments are instituted. So we see what was placed in the hands of the government. Because what we have now does not look like what the founders intended. And thus, I would say, by far and large, our government here in the United States of America in many ways are in violation of their constitutional position. All right, so let me keep reading. I can go on forever about that. Deriving their powers from the consent of the governed. Let me read that again. Deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to institute a new government laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness, prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations pursuing invariably the same object evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Now, when you look at the wording and what was said, I understand why this wording would make certain within Washington very uncomfortable, and I think that's partly why they avoid these documents, because the truths contained within these documents make them uncomfortable. I think many in Washington, maybe it's by design, maybe it's nefarious, maybe there's a group of people who are in league together to do these things. Maybe it's just the sin nature of man working its way out. We definitely know the sin nature of man is working its way out. Now, whether this is done by design, whether these people have gotten together and devised some plan to subjugate people, who knows? I won't get into all of that. What I will say is many avoid this document because they're uncomfortable with the truth that's in this document. Clearly, the founders understood governments are formed to secure these inalienable rights, not rights that the government gives, rights that men and women are born with from their creator. These rights don't come from the government. This is what the founders believed. This is their intent. We see this in the Declaration of Independence. And we see in the Declaration of Independence that what they believed is when these governments spiraled down that dark road of tyranny and despotism, it was not only the right of the people, it was the duty of the people to do away with such governments. This is something that many politicians are uncomfortable with. This is the framework and the backdrop by where the Second Amendment is established. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to this article on historychannel.com. Let's see if I can switch to this. It's my desktop. That's not where I wanted to go. Declaration. I went there. All right, here we go. Okay, so this is a history.com, my fault, article that was written November 27th, 2019. Or was updated, my fault, updated November 27th, 2019. The original article was written December 4th, 2017. All right. The Second Amendment, often referred to as the right to bear arms, is one of 10 amendments from the Bill of Rights, ratified in 1791 by the U.S. Congress. Differing interpretations of the amendment have fueled a long-running debate over gun control legislation and the rights of the individual citizens to buy, own, and carry firearms. Now, one of the arguments that's made about the Second Amendment is the argument is often made that when it refers to militia, it's talking about an army. Now, I advocate this even in on my Bible podcast and in my Bible study. When you look at the writings of someone, and especially if the writings are farther back in history than your current vantage point, then you have to consider the definitions of the words as they were at that time. The reason is, oftentimes, we will change and modify the definition of words. So how we use a word and what it means to us now may not be the same thing it meant in that time. And you have to rectify that when reading something that preceded you in history. And I think this is one of the problems people get to when they get to that word militia in the Second Amendment. And this article is actually gonna cover that, and I think it does a very good job and further makes the case. The text of the Second Amendment reads in full, "A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed." The framers of the Bill of Rights adapted the wording of the amendment from nearly identical clauses in some of the original 13 state constitutions. So some of the original 13 state constitutions had a Second Amendment clause. Obviously, to each individual state, it wasn't referred to as the Second Amendment, but they had a clause for the people to keep and bear arms. Now you got to remember the climate, the climate of the time, right? Socially. Remember what happened. The King of England overstepped his bounds, infringed on their freedom to the point where they thought, all right, this is it. Enough is enough. You've gone too far. This is the end of the road for you. They rebelled. Now, from a Bible believer standpoint, and that's not really the direction of this podcast per se, but I am a believer. 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. This is what informs all my thought. I'm not getting into whether they should have rebelled, whether it was the right thing to rebel. That's not the point. The point is we're getting to the intent of the framers, right? So they felt like the King of England overstepped his bounds. He went one step too far, and they said, that's it. You're done. They rebelled. How did they rebel? Well, the people were armed. When the British came over, the people thwarted at the time, the greatest standing army and navy at the time were thwarted by people who were armed. Remember that, because that matters when you read that Second Amendment. During the Revolutionary era, militia referred to groups of men who banded together to protect their communities, towns, colonies, and eventually states. Once the United States declared its independence from Great Britain in 1776, many people in America at the time believed governments used soldiers to oppress the people and thought the federal government should only be allowed to raise armies with full-time paid soldiers when facing foreign adversaries. Now remember, this is the climate. This is what people thought at the time. And also look at what a militia was. It wasn't the standing army of the government. This was individual people. And we're gonna see further here. For all other purposes, they believed it should turn to part-time militias or ordinary civilians using their own weapons. This is what this was. This is what militia means. It's not the government army. This is regular, everyday people. This is what the militia is. And even though there's many within Washington that want to hijack or attempt to hijack the meaning of the Constitution, I don't believe there's any way you could look at the Declaration of Independence, look at the history of what these men came out of, and look at the preamble to the U.S. Constitution and then read the Second Amendment and come away with any other conclusion than that this was meant to discourage despotism and tyranny, period. That is the whole and sole purpose of the Second Amendment. Again, as I said, as a peripheral, you can hunt and you can defend yourself individually, but that wasn't the purpose of the Second Amendment. That was not the purpose at all. Do these people in Washington not understand that? No, I think they understand it. But I think there's a concerted effort to get regular, everyday, normal people to view the Second Amendment in a separate context from which it was written. I think that's the purpose. I think this is the reason Jerry Nadler asked the question the way he asked. He wanted to pull on emotional strings. He wanted to paint Mr. Roy into a corner, and he wanted to paint a picture of somebody attacking a U.S. troop. That's the picture he wanted in your head. When the real clear picture of the Second Amendment is a government that is enslaved and committed unthinkable atrocities, and the power and the right of the people to undo said government. When I think about Nazi Germany, you think about soldiers and people who stripped Jewish people of their goods, destroyed their businesses, put them in camps, put these people in gas chambers, starved these people to death. Was it right for people to sit idly by and watch this happen? What could these people have done? They were unarmed. What could they possibly do? Nothing. The founders of the United States understood history. They were not perfect men, but they were wise men. They were not sinless men, but they were thinking men. Not everything they did and said was correct, but they got a lot of things right. And in my opinion, historically, as far as man-made documents are concerned, the U.S. Constitution is pretty brilliant, in my opinion. You see, they understood enough about history to understand if we don't know this, we will repeat it. And the one thing they understood that many people do not seem to understand today, either willingly or nefariously, either by ignorance or by just merely not paying attention, what many don't understand is that an unarmed people is a subjugated people. And that was something that the founders saw fit to try to mitigate. But people just don't seem to understand that because the conversation has been hijacked. Hopefully I made my case and hopefully it was clear. Y'all know what it is. Stay frosty, people.